are live. So this has been a fast first hour of the start of week 2. We had the jobs research. We looked at how not only are startups creating jobs in regions, but these large companies, innovation groups, or the so-called gazelles inside big companies, are growing. And then just had an amazing conversation with David Coulter, Carnegie Mellon trustee, partner at Warburg Pincus. Again, today overall is looking at people and the people behind this. What we wanted to do next is actually dive into a case study on Giant Eagle specifically. You may not be familiar with Giant Eagle, so I'm going to ask their EVP and CTO, Kirk Ball, to start us off just explaining who Giant Eagle is. Because, Kirk, we have people from literally, actually all over the world. We have people from Europe dialed in as well. If you're not in Giant Eagle's footprint, that may not be a known name to you. So maybe just for a moment, if you could just explain what Giant Eagle is, and then we'll get to innovation, your role, Sid's role, et cetera.
Sure. Thanks, everybody, for allowing me to spend a few minutes with you. Hope everybody's having a good day and a good session. Giant Eagle is a regional grocery retailer that operates across 5 to 6 states, kind of in the Mid-Atlantic through the Midwest, from Indiana down through Maryland. And we just had Sid Luthra join, who leads innovation for Giant Eagle. And as mentioned, I work in the technology space. But Giant Eagle has about 240 large format grocery stores, and we have about 275 convenience stores and growing, and obviously several distribution locations. And again, we kind of operate between 5 to 6 states, from Indiana through Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Maryland. And so while you might not think that the retail grocery space is a place for innovation, it actually is a lot of innovation that we've done in the past and a lot that's going on. Sid, would you have anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I'm sorry I missed the first part of that, but I think that the combination of all the different businesses that we have make it an exciting place to do innovation, between the grocery and the convenience and the fuel business, the pharmacy, everything that's going on with online grocery right now. It's definitely multi-format, even though, people describe Giant Eagle as a supermarket. It's a combination of a lot of different businesses.
So maybe for a little bit more context to get started, Kirk, this is not your first rodeo in the grocery and retail space. So you were at Kroger, which is another regional grocery chain. People may be familiar if they're not familiar with Giant Eagle. And then you were at a regional healthcare and hospital network in Cincinnati, and then came back into the retail and grocery space. How do you think retail and healthcare are similar and different as it relates to tech and tech-enabled innovation?
Yeah, I think they're similar in that anything that you can do to create a seamless, frictionless experience, whether it's the consumer or the patient, to help them interact with the entity in ways that they might not have been able to do 10, 15 years ago. It's really, really important that you allow them to get information, get access to information, be able to create shopping lists, be able to look at the services that are offered through the health network. So clearly the digital platforms and digitally interacting with customers to eliminate friction for them as they work with the entities is incredibly similar. I would also say the ability to have a very robust analytics capability to understand what all is going on with your customers or your patients, either one. It's very, very important to understand the mechanics of what is actually happening in the business in a real-time fashion so that you can make effective decisions, whether it's from a healthcare perspective or whether it's from a retail perspective. The differences obviously are, in both cases, you are selling services, you're selling goods and services. Yeah. So that too is a similarity. But obviously they're a little bit different set of goods and services, although more related than you might think, right? Because obviously a big part of health and maintaining a healthy profile and lifestyle, it's based upon what you put in your basket and what you eat and what you cook for your family and the pharmaceuticals that you buy from our pharmacies. So there actually is some synergy between the two, even though they're selling, for the most part, different goods and services. But I would say in terms of trying to drive a healthy lifestyle, still somewhat related.
Yeah. Just a quick kind of programming plug based on that answer as well. So the opening session on Thursday, for those of you in the forum, is going to be Carrie Holly, who's the first fellow at Optum, which is part of United Healthcare Group. And he's giving a talk on the future of healthcare looks a lot like retail, which I think ties into some of those surprising similarities between the two last jobs that Kirk had. So again, we want to get to kind of this session talking about how innovation is really a team game and a team sport, and how the two of you and your respective organizations work together. But maybe, Sid, it might be helpful just to talk about the innovation mandate to get started, right? So what was sort of the charge that you've been given as it relates to leading innovation inside Giant Eagle?
It's definitely a moving target. So it might be worthwhile to give a little bit of history here.
Great.
So I joined Giant Eagle about 2 years ago. And prior to that, I think if you ask a lot of people at Giant Eagle, they'd say we were an innovative organization, but we didn't have an innovation function. As a result of that, sometimes it felt like people were chasing down different things that may not be worthwhile opportunities. And every once in a while, we'd stumble upon a really good idea. And we were really good about capturing those ideas and moving them forward and investing in them. When I joined Giant Eagle, the initial charge was we don't move fast enough. We just go do stuff, right? Just go build things, run over anyone who's in the way, take this outside in approach, and just create new exciting things. Now, I would say that mandate wasn't super successful, and we weren't really able to execute against that because we really didn't have the buy-in from the organization. Running over people is not necessarily the best way to get them to say, yeah, I support your innovation. So over the last, I'd say, a year or so, we've been sort of retooling that mandate. And what we've been working on is something that's much more collaborative, that ties into the organization, that integrates with the different functions. And now I think if I had to put it in one line, it's really to help the organization identify and prioritize opportunities to get into new markets and build new capabilities, and sort of vet those ideas and run experiments so that the organization knows where to point its innovative energy.
So I think, to me, that what you just described is sort of the what you're doing now, right? The prioritization, taking a maybe more of a portfolio approach to it. My sense, and please feel free to disagree here. I know you will, but just to sort of put that on the record, like my sense is the why has been pretty consistent, but maybe that's sort of my outside looking in, or do you feel like that has shifted as well?
No, I think the why is fairly consistent. I think there's a couple components to it. One is that every single one of the businesses that we're in is changing incredibly fast. From a grocery perspective, whether it's Amazon, from a pharmacy perspective, also Amazon, from a convenience perspective, also Amazon. But there are all these broader underlying trends, not just in the consumer-facing business units, but also in the different, we call them centers of excellence, the functions, right? So supply chain is changing so quickly, the way that people run operations. And I think standing still is falling behind. And that's long been a part of Giant Eagle's DNA. So it's really taking our core capabilities and saying, how can we better apply them to continue to be competitive in our markets?
Yeah. In some ways, like that's kind of the mandate, and you've gone through a couple iterations of how to achieve that. And you're now taking this sort of structured approach of synthesizing ideas, taking a portfolio approach to it, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So with that context, Kirk, because again, we want to talk about kind of innovation as a team sport here today. And you're the CTO, you're an EVP at Giant Eagle. I assume part of that is the normal thing CTOs worry about, like the kind of core infrastructure, but I'm sure a lot of it also ties right into what Sid was talking about. What do you think is kind of technology's role in that mandate that we just were talking about around innovation?
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting to watch over the last 5 to 10 years as senior leaders that I've worked with, whether it be at Kroger or at Giant Eagle or at the Christ Hospital Health Network, clearly understand that leveraging technology as a competitive weapon, if you will, or as a capability to create competitive differentiation, it's absolutely core to being able to create competitive differentiation. So clearly, technology and innovation, in my opinion, go heavily hand in hand. I'm trying to think of significant innovations, not ideas, but significant innovations that have not been enabled or accelerated through the application of technology to help them to help that innovation create competitive differentiation. So I do think it's a team sport. I think we always have to make sure that we're not doing innovation for the sake of technology, that we're doing it for the sake of our customers or the sake of our associates or the sake of our business. But it is an incredibly important I think one of the top two or three core enablers of accelerating innovation at a pace that matters. And I think that's the other thing that people that I work with are starting to clearly understand. We have to work through a cycle of innovation that's very, very quick, so that we can sift through a number of potential ideas and get to the ones that truly are going to prove themselves out. So we can move those from a seed stage to a Series A to a Series B, C, and then on into production at a pace and a velocity that matters. And whether it's using simulation technologies, whether it's using software and hardware to create, a metaphor for the real world to test things out, if you will, in a digital platform versus having to go build a store and try things out in the store before you prove them. I just think it is a team sport. I think the two have to work together. The innovation process and technology are just there's an intimacy of intertwinement there that is necessary to make things go.
So it was interesting to me. You just everything you said was actually interesting. But one thing that jumped out to me that you just said was you talked about a seed, Series A, Series B, which is very much the vernacular I would be used to thinking about with my traditional startups, right? With the investments that I'm making. Do you guys have similar sort of yardsticks, or do you have kind of a mental model of this is a seed stage idea, this is a Series A, Series B idea?
I'll add just a couple of comments, and I think Sid can take you through the metamorphosis that we're going through from an innovation standpoint. When I first got here, which was not too long ago, I could tell there had been a history of what Sid had said, and that is that innovation was perceived as just to go do a ton of stuff with no structure, no necessarily metrics to measure the progress or success, but it was the illusion that a lot of activity meant a lot of progress in trying new things, and that didn't necessarily translate. So Sid and I got together, and I'm going to ask him just to kind of take you through the framework that we put together, which I just kind of alluded to a little bit ago, to really get some not obsessive, or I should say, a structure that slows things down, but actually structure that makes things go faster. So Sid, why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think there was this prevailing sentiment that the best way to test things was to put them in the real world and build the solution, put it in the store, and see how customers react to it. It turns out that's actually a really bad way to test solutions, because you spend a lot of money on something that may or may not work, and you sort of create these artificial environments where you say, well, the customers can interact with it, but it sort of works, and you either go whole hog or you don't get a good answer. So we started thinking about it more in terms of experiments. And I noticed you have the business model canvas up behind you. And a lot of what we're thinking about is loosely based on that, in terms of how do you take an idea and at the very beginning evaluate it for desirability, feasibility, and viability, to make sure that this is an idea that you want to continue investing in and put resources against. And then, as a startup would do, how do you test some of those critical assumptions in your business model? And whether it's an idea or a whole new business, that there's still critical assumptions, and how do you test those and use those to say, well, we've proven this, so we can go get more funding for the idea, just like a startup would.
And who are you going to get funding from in this case? Do you have a budget, or is that the board? How's that work?
So we set up our innovation steering committee, which is a group of people who represent different parts of the organization. So innovation, IT, operations, that has a big stake in this, some of the other business leaders. And I think the goal of that group is really to create a group of skeptics, right? Just to say, well, did you think of this? Or what happens in this situation where this doesn't work? And our ability to defend it is what gets these ideas onto the next stage.
The other thing I wanted to mention is, kind of in the ideation phase, trying to look at all the potential opportunities that there are to vet in the innovation steering team. There's certainly a desire for us to leverage as many third-party relationships as we can, whether it be private equity firms. We've got relationships with a number of PE firms to help us understand, for us to give them challenges or to give them areas where we might have an interest to see where they're investing. Do they have companies in their portfolio that would be investing in these particular areas? So the greater number of opportunities that we can review and that we can have others help us review, it will help hopefully accelerate us focusing through the innovation steering team that Sid talked about to get the ideas quickly whittled down, but to have looked at a broad number of ideas and for us to quickly determine which are the right ones for us to focus on.
So one thing I'd add to that as well is this approach allows us to interact with other third parties, as Kirk mentioned, in a way that the old approach didn't, right? Because if you say, take the solution, go integrate it with our systems and put it in the store, no third party can do that. We're the only ones who can do that. But if you say we want to test the market demand for the solution by, setting up a landing page, anyone can go do that. So now it opens up all sorts of possibilities for what we call the innovation ecosystem.
And I do think, and there's a question that one of the participants has: how do you get your team members to be creatively innovative versus being a copycat? I do think as you sit and spend time with the private equity firms or other third parties, educational institutions, and you start noodling on particular challenges that you have, there's a lot of creativity that comes from that collaboration work. And it helps folks internal start to mature or grow their capability to think, outside the box and to think in an innovative way and to see things differently. The more different perspectives that you can get and sift through in your mind, that helps you become more creative as well. And that's one of the things that we hope these third party relationships also help us do with our culture internally.
Yeah.
Can I also address that question in the chat? Because I think it's a fascinating question.
Of course.
Because I think that the idea of the question sort of poses it like being a copycat's a bad thing. I think that there are cases where being a copycat is great. Someone's already solved the problem for you, and if you can go solve it fast by being a fast follower, we should absolutely go do that, right? If it's already a solved problem, we don't need to go reinvent the wheel. But I think the way that we make sure that we're pursuing the right solutions and driving creative innovation is by focusing not on the solutions. And this gets to Kirk's earlier point around, we're not looking for technology, we're looking for solutions. And to do that, we really need to understand the problem. So I think shifting the problem from looking at all the different or shifting the question from all the different other solutions that are out there to what's the problem that we're trying to solve. Sometimes that problem will be unique, sometimes it won't. If it's not unique and there's already a solution, we should be a copycat. We shouldn't go reinvent it.
Yeah, that's very good. So just to tie to a couple of things that other parts of the programming, just to help. So first of all, you mentioned the business model canvas. Just as a reminder for Bay, tomorrow at 1, Alex Osterwalder, who created the business model canvas, is actually going to be talking. This is actually the corporate startup canvas, which we created at CSL, but it's kind of a complement to the business model canvas. But also to Kirk's point, I do think CVC, and I've been saying this kind of a couple times throughout, but I do think corporate venture, and whether that's full corporate venture capital initiatives or partnerships with VC and PE firms, are generally underutilized. And so eventually we will get some videos out from this. We'll kind of clean these up and get them out. Last week's video of the roundtable on corporate venture capital, I think really gets to how to take advantage of this. Looks like there's a follow-up from Richard as well. Richard says, I love the Scan and Go app. How are you finding adoption by customers? My experience is that most folks are not using it, which is fine for me, but I'm sure you would like greater adoption.
I'll take a stab at it, and then I'm sure Sid will have a perspective. Look, I think one of the things that we can do is we have we talked about the elimination of friction for consumers. Yeah. In order to interact with Giant Eagle across the digital spectrum, whether it be the Scan Bag and Go app or the pharmacy app or the My Perks app, we have multiple apps. So one of the things that we're working on is how do we start to integrate those apps into one app that have multiple avenues of capability. So one, I think we're going to increase adoption by creating a more frictionless experience so that you have to log in once and only once in order to get to all the functionality that you need. There are a pretty loyal following of folks that are using the Scan Bag and Go app, or I should say Scan and Go app. In terms of we would like greater adoption, and we're working to implement a number of features and functions we've taken feedback from consumers, and we're continually working to upgrade the application to address those concerns and sets of feedback that our consumers are giving us. Sid, anything on that topic?
We've seen an incredible amount of growth there. I'm not saying it's we're done growing there.
Sure.
But I think what Kirk mentioned in terms of the experience and, providing optionality to our customers, that's the direction in which it's heading, and we're going to have to continue to evolve that product. But it's all moving in that direction, and I think we're relatively early into that space.
Cool. All right, well, let's continue on this innovation ecosystem, and we'll sort of step into the Giant Eagle ecosystem from that. But just in the broader ecosystem, you talked about CVC and PE groups. What are the other kind of groups that you're thinking about, not even necessarily by name, but just by category, as other parts of the broader ecosystem for Giant Eagle?
Yeah, it's a combination of, well, we want to include everyone in that ecosystem, right? In some cases, it's other retailers who compete with us. If it makes us both better, and there's money for both of us, and it's not a zero-sum game, then we should absolutely cooperate to do innovation where we have aligned opportunities. But broader than that, it's like Kirk mentioned, VC funds, PE, private equity funds, incubators, accelerators, universities are a big one. I think that's a big untapped opportunity. There are a bunch of really smart people. There are labs that are doing some fantastic work. We are lucky to be in the same city as CMU, and I think that's something that's been underutilized in the past. And then the startup ecosystem, or the startup landscape that exists in Pittsburgh, and more broadly. But we have the benefit of being in Pittsburgh. I don't think we do enough to interact with those startups to say, how do we solve problems together, as opposed to saying, here's our need, let's go find the perfect solution.
Kirk, anything to add to that?
The only thing I would add is that, there are lots of corporations as well that you can participate in co-creation of intellectual property, and eventually products that are more than willing to participate and join with enterprises to do the same. But I think Sid provided a pretty comprehensive list.
That's great. All right, well, let's keep going, and hopefully he'll be in a minute. So beyond these sort of external parties, I thought the next thing to talk about, and it would be great for both of you to weigh on this, but you can start, and hopefully Kirk will come in. It's just how you get your teams to work together. So within the walls of Giant Eagle, how do you get these groups to collaborate and work together?
That's been something I've been trying to figure out for the last 2 years, and frankly, we didn't always work well together. And I think part of that had to do with the initial mandate, right? Which was,
sure,
you own innovation, just go do things. Now that makes you enemies, not because people are saying, that they own innovation, which to some extent it does, because a lot of people are saying, I'm being innovative in my job every day. But also when you go do things that, you go put something in a store that the IT team doesn't know about, it makes their jobs more difficult. So I think one of the things that Kirk and I have been working through over the last couple months is how do we make each other's jobs easier, right? So from an IT perspective, how do we help them understand what's coming down the pipeline? How do we help them prioritize projects that were previously being thrown over the wall at them? Any business leader sees a new shiny object and throws it at IT because that's where they all end up landing. How do we help them prioritize that and really become a resource to that team? And then similarly, I'm not actually a tech guy. I pretend to be. But I'm certainly not a developer. So when it comes to taking some of these ideas that are really exciting and actually implementing them, we don't have the resources to do that. So how do we take the IT team and think about how they can help us develop the answers, the solutions a little bit faster? I think a key part of that is open dialogue, which we didn't always have, and transparency about the projects that we're working on, what we think is going to work, what's not going to work, and the coordination piece of that. So it's been a very different experience over the last couple months than it has in the past, because I think Kirk sees that too.
So how do you go from identifying problems to implementation? Do you create internal ad hoc teams? Do you work with agencies? Do you work with startups? And if so, how? That's from Quarantine.
Yeah. So part of this approach is doing a lot more work up front. Really nailing down the problem and what we're trying to solve for, breaking it down into its root causes, and then using that to develop a plan for what time and resources are going to be needed. Not necessarily to implement the whole thing, but just to get it to the next stage. Right? We think that this is worth investing some more resources in testing it. That's really it, right? So when you have an idea, you don't jump to, well, we want $100 million from the VC fund, but we want another $100,000 to go test this idea. So in doing that, we also lay out what our time and resources are, who needs to be involved. And we really do stand up these sort of ad hoc teams around the idea, because at this point, we've already done enough research and analysis and vetting to say that this is an idea at least worth standing up a team for, and then moving it through the process. Do we work with agencies? Sure, why not? If it's the best way to do it, yes. And same with startups. So sometimes it's best for our teams to build it. But oftentimes if there's a startup that's already built the solution, we don't need to go build it. But everything ultimately still has a technology connection, an operations connection, because it's not just about, you can roll out a piece of technology, but unless you have the people in the process to back up that technology, it doesn't work. So it's really about standing up these cross-functional groups, and making sure we have the ties in the right places, all the right stakeholders.
I think the only thing I would add to that is we are budgeting time out of the technology group to have available for the opportunity when an innovation opportunity comes along, to have some time to be able to step in and do that as we see fit.
And I guess, Kirk, how do you think about, I imagine those are desirable projects to get on relative to other projects, just given how technologists are wired. So how do you think about, spreading that innovation time across your teams?
Yeah, I think that's really important to make sure that we do, right? You don't want the same set of individuals on every innovation cycle. Otherwise, it tells the rest of the organization that you do the mundane stuff. We've got the innovative folks over here. But I do think, obviously, when you stand up innovation, at least through the different stages, it typically will require more and more people to get engaged, whether it be network engineers or developers or database folks or this, that, or the other, right? So we are working hard over time to make sure that we are going to spread the opportunity from ideation through development, through implementation of those solutions that make it all the way through the stages, that we do spread that around quite a bit.
I think there's an important point here, which is under the old approach of just, here's the shiny object, go chase it.
Yeah.
You are going to have everyone from your people who adopt it as their pet project to the people who say, I want no part of this. This is going to be a failure, all the way from leadership to the people who are working on the project. No one wants to be part of a project that's going to fail, right? But if we do this research analysis vetting up front of the ideas and say this is something that's actually really likely to work, the business units want to be part of it, right? Who wouldn't want that idea on their P&L if it's a slam dunk? Team members want to work on it because it's a cool project, but it's going to work. You're not spinning your wheels for months or even years on an idea that's destined to fail. So I think there's more of a draw to these projects the more work we do up front.
And the work that's done up front is sort of you and your team predominantly, Sid, or are you pulling those folks in, right? Like, it sounds like there's some amount of kind of fuzzy front end that still lives within the innovation group. Is that right?
Yeah, I think to Kirk's point, it increases over time, right? So it might start with just the innovation team and saying here's the sort of frame of an idea that we might have, but we're not going to be able to say whether that is something that's feasible without going and talking to people in the technology team. Now, we're not upfront going to say, hey, we have this vague idea, go integrate it into all of our systems. It's going to be maybe an interview with a subject matter expert, right? So this has implications for our database, right? So we're going to go talk to our data warehouse team to understand what those implications are without having them do anything up front. And then as we progress the idea, the level of involvement increases.
That's awesome. So another thing I want to talk to you about, and this predates Kirk getting involved, but I remember meeting with you and Laura in Laura's office a couple years ago, right? And it was clear that, like, from the top down, that this was something that there was commitment around. And so, Sid, I guess I'm curious, like, as you think about what you've done in the last couple of years, how do you think about that kind of top-down support in terms of operationalizing the why behind this?
I think there's two things that enables. One is that it gives us a lot more credibility with our ecosystem, right? To know that Giant Eagle is not just saying the word innovation, but you have buy-in all the way from the top. And then the other thing that it allows us to do is take sort of a longer-term view towards innovation. If you're not the CEO of the company, you've got a P&L that you're responsible for. But Laura also has a P&L that she's responsible for, but she can also think about it on a different horizon. So it gives us a little bit more leeway from an innovation perspective to place some more bets on the come.
Yeah, I guess, and this could be for either of you, but just for leaders listening who are trying to sell their leadership on these same types of programs, what advice would you give them?
Well, I think there's always the hammer, which is we're going to innovate or we're going to die. But I do think most companies have a pretty rich history of innovation that they've done, or they wouldn't be successful and have gotten where they are. So I think you draw upon the history of innovation. I think you help them understand that innovation and the pace of innovation and how companies are creating competitive differentiation with that innovation is certainly a compelling argument. I think if you look at the list of the companies that made up the Dow 25 years ago, and you look at the list of the companies that make up the Dow today, I think there's only one or two companies that are the same. And I think that's a message that says we have to continue to innovate. We have to continue to be relevant to our customers. We have to anticipate where customers are going. And then I think you talk about current things that you have going on. And things that have been successful in the very recent past, and things that you're working on, they're going to help you as a company skate to where the puck is, not where it is, where it's going to be, not where it is, right? I think those are all ways that you take senior leadership on a journey.
Yeah. We shared some of that insight data on the S&P 500 at the beginning of the conference. I do think that that's an eye-opener for sure for people.
It sure is.
Sid, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think there's an analogy to being an entrepreneur, which is if you don't think about the ideas and you're just focused on living your life, eventually you may stumble upon a really good idea. But more often than not, you're going to be successful if you stop and you think about a lot of problems and you vet them out. And frankly, that takes a lot of time. Innovation is a numbers game. And if you're entirely focused on running the business, you're not going to be able to evaluate enough ideas at the pace that you need to keep up. So I think that's where having a dedicated innovation program, that's not to say that it's a standalone innovation program where it doesn't touch the rest of the organization, but dedicated to thinking about these problems is where you really get the best bang for your buck. Innovation really doesn't feel like something you can do off the side of your desk.
I also think if you can help your senior leadership, business leadership understand that there's going to be a structure and an approach to innovation that maximizes the amount of time invested, maximizes the dollars invested, and that you're doing innovation in as intelligent a way as you can. For instance, if we want to do something in a store, let's say that measures the queuing and trying to improve the queue time through the front end of the store, I can do a lot of discrete event simulations, modeling a store and traffic and taking traffic patterns and do all that in a discrete event simulation model before I have to rearrange a store, right? And so I think you also have to explain how you're going to do innovation and do it in a way that makes sense and leverages and maximizes the investment in the innovation and increases the velocity.
Yeah, that's awesome. So last question. We've just got about 2 minutes here. You two are relatively new working together. I think, Kirk, you joined about 6 months ago, it looks like. So what have you guys done to ensure a good working relationship between the two of you as the leaders of tech and innovation, which maybe other technologists and innovation leaders could think about for their working relationships?
One thing for me is I am as invested in the organization's success as Sid is. I am as invested in his success as I am my own and my teammates. I want his teammates to be successful. So we kind of are jointly rooting for each other and our organization and our organizations that we lead. So it's not, first and foremost, it's not a competition, right? But I'm pretty convinced that it's the two parts together that are going to help innovation be successful. And I think that's a really good way to have a relationship.
I totally agree with that. I think it goes back to the open dialogue that we talked about earlier, getting rid of any sort of territoriality that exists where, it's saying I own innovation or, you don't get to touch it, because innovation happens all over the organization. And how do we think about being resources to each other to accelerate each other's work?
That's great. So 10 seconds, just if people are part of this broader ecosystem and want to plug into Giant Eagle, Sid, Kirk, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you? LinkedIn, website? How do you want people to connect?
I would say LinkedIn.
Yep, LinkedIn's good.
All right, awesome. All right, well, thanks, guys. Really appreciate you doing this. We're going to wrap this session up now, everybody, and we're going to move to the back-to-back organizational behavior professors. So we're going to start with Denise Rousseau in just a moment here. Thanks again, Kirk and Sid.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.